Thank you. It is, I get the chance to talk with a number of audiences, well, most years. The Grinch stole a lot of those too. Um, but it is always kind of a real pleasure, special one, to be able to talk with you guys because um, I think there we go. Um, because a lot of us are friends. Simple as that, not complicated. And I've got the pleasure, as we were talking earlier, to introduce some of my other friends, some of my Fort Worth friends, and that's wonderful. What I'm going to try to do tonight is talk with you about a couple of things. I could frame this in terms of an early Anthropocene discussion. I could frame this in terms of how completely the ancient Maya managed and manipulated the landscape that they lived in and created it as they wanted it to. Um, I am going to try to weave in some of the things that we do with some LiDAR materials and some of our kind of eye-opening, honestly mouth-dropping um, new data. And of course, if you're probably not in the archaeological world if you haven't heard about LiDAR, but it is a laser-based system of doing highly detailed land mapping, and it works through 100-foot canopy forests. So with that, let me share the screen and give you something better to look at than me. So I often like to start out by pointing out something that is pretty self-evident to me, and that is that when we're talking about the ancient Maya people, we're talking about um, populations that could have been as high as 25 or more million. The new LiDAR data we're seeing is making us even force those numbers up higher. But there's something like 3 million Maya speakers today in the peninsula. And this was from a little village in northern Yucatan called Yaxna. And that little altar may not look like a giant pyramid, but it carries with it all the symbolic and power and meaning of an altar pyramid. And the gentleman who's standing there is a Maya shaman who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. But there are lots of people who call themselves Maya before anything else. What lots of us have some idea of is that there are big pyramids in Central America. I met a gentleman, I think it was a couple of years ago. I don't remember who it was, but he told me that he's seen all the Maya pyramids. And I said, well, that's just amazing. How long did it take you? Oh, we got on the bus in the morning. We were back by dinner. What he meant to say is that he saw all the Maya pyramids in the one side of Chichen Itza. And I'll show you a little map later on that will clearly make the point that he didn't see all the pyramids. I haven't seen all the pyramids. It's not close. But we do have this perception of these big, giant cities. And where I work in northwestern Belize, they're cities, but they're not giant. They're not Cahal. They're not Chichen Itza. They're not those names that you think of. These are small cities. The city of Blue Creek, which we worked on for 20 years, we estimate the population as 25,000 people. LiDAR tends to make that, confirm that. Maybe it's a little on the low side. We haven't gone out working on that project yet. So this is a little bit about what we do and a little bit about these small cities and how we know about them and what we know about them. First of all, my research program is a consortium that I'm fortunate enough to be the head of these folks. And I could obviously spend my hour and tell you all about how wonderful they are. And they are absolutely amazing. I'll give you a couple of them. The one sticking your finger over there is Katie, Hannah Plumer Moody. I can get it out. I'm confusing two people. Hannah was an undergraduate with us. I didn't speak with her much her first couple of weeks there, and then I just happened into her and we chatted, and I decided we could never lose this person. See, she's since finished her doctoral degree. She's teaching at a junior college in Toronto, and she's one of our bioarchaeologists, and oh, by the way, has a month-old kid. Those are the kinds of stories that are how we built these relationships. These are people who know each other intimately well and have for years and years and years. Some of them are the very tops of their field, and I'm proud to work with every one of them. I'll point out one more, April Martinez. April is a Belizean, and she is a lecturer at the University of Belize, and we are now training the University of Belize's field school students, which will be the next generation of their archaeologists. We are the chosen group to do that. It's not just us and a bunch of others. We have a memorandum of understanding between my university and them to continue doing so. And research is what it's about, right? Everything is fun. If one thing we can all agree on, the second archaeology quit being fun, we'd all stop. All of us, no matter what role we play in it. These are some recent books that have come out in the past 12 years about our work. And research is the middle name and the most important concept of my research program. We also provide experiences for people who want to come join us. Well, every summer, but this one. This gentleman is Thomas Ruhl. He's Belgian, and he's now a doctoral candidate at University of Cincinnati, and he's a co-author of an important article that came out a few weeks ago on Cahal. And lots of people get to come. Anybody who wants to come gets to come. It's a pretty happy group. I know those people well. They're not faking those smiles. Occasionally when there are community events, we get to take people to them. That gets pretty colorful. This is some lab work going on in our facility in Belize. That's my good friend Lutz, who is not only is he just an absolutely wonderful person for many reasons, but he always brings something interesting like high quality Bavarian vodka for me. I don't get it. A given day in Blue Creek is like this. This is walking through the forest, not far, a couple hundred yards from the parking spaces to where we are excavating. And this is the beginning of a typical day. Out of the trucks, hiking off to get to work. There are little pyramids everywhere in these sites. Here's Thomas again. This is Ben Baskey from Texas A&M University, the School of Architecture. We have colleagues in many fields. As every archaeologist knows, what goes with every archaeological site is backed earth piles. Just a couple of excavation photographs from the past couple of years. This is a beginning excavation of a building at Xnoha, a sheltoon that one of our students is in. Excavations going on here. And we have a 1,500 square foot laboratory and a 400 square foot laboratory in which we do this stuff. This is our wonderful illustrator, former now because she has a full-time job and can't come back next year. She got the nickname Xerox, so you can just guess why. And despite the fact that research is our middle name and research and teaching is the same thing, things happen, as you can well guess. So here are two of my students. Jesse met Kevin in front of my office a few doors down from where I'm sitting right now. And that was pretty much the life changer for them. So there they are on top of the tallest pyramid at Cahal. And he is in fact proposing, and she in fact said yes. And Rachel was a quiet young student who, not outgoing, not secure, who blossomed and a few months ago received her master's degree from University of Mississippi. This is our friend and colleague, Mark Wolf. He's our surveyor. Mark is kind of internationally famous for the things he does in the forest. And I love his question. It's not about teaching you how to use a piece of equipment. It's about why. Some activities in our lab. This is Bob Warden. He's well, until a few months ago, was the head of the Department of Architecture at Texas A&M, and now he's done with that stuff and is much happier. This is Michelle Vitale. Michelle is with the Institute of Forensic Sciences at Edinburgh University. What she's doing and what she's done for years, she is an artist, moved into forensic sciences and began doing cranial reconstructions of murder victims. If you think they might make a television series out of this, they actually are. And now she is doing the same thing, but doing 3D facial reconstructions of dead Maya people, which is just eye-opening in what it gives us in terms of stuff and things we just never thought of. That's just some background. Here's what today's topic is. You're reading it. I don't have to repeat it, but maybe I will. Many people understand the geopolitical landscape through iconography. Look, when you look at the incredible work done by people like Linda Shealy, David Stewart, my mentor, David Friedel, the insights since 1987, 86, I just looked at the wall, and the breakthrough was the Blood of Kings exhibit at the Kimball Museum, and I've got the original poster. It was August 1986. It started in Fort Worth. That was Linda Shealy's breakthrough moment, and what we've learned since then is amazing. However, when the art historians only take the iconography and art, and they don't take the archaeology and the on-the-ground dirt materials into account, because they're just not trained in it, they get a one-dimensional view of the full reality. We're all like that. We also know those big kingdoms. Let's talk about the little ones. We found this a couple of years ago, and I just want to point it out. The story's great. You know, I'd love to be able to say, oh my God, we found this in situ. We found this, and it's this important piece. It's a giant block of stone. We found it someplace because we were great archaeologists. Truth of the matter is, I wanted to rent a boat from a guy. I knew him, so I saw his boat up on top of the hill by his house. So I went up to his house and said, can I rent the boat? And he said, I don't know, it's my brother's, I have to check. Before you leave, look, I want to show you this. I found it in my field. And he turned it over and I almost fell down, because what you're seeing is a dated monument with the Snake Kings, the Khan Dynasty emblem glyph right there, and a date putting it into the middle of the 8th century AD. And it's the only evidence of the Khan Dynasty that ruled much of the region for hundreds of years, from several sites. Ultimately, I'm sorry, ultimately I just forgot the name of the one that I was going to tell you. So The Khan dynasty was in northwestern Belize, but they were the big powerhouses. But what was their relationship? We don't know. By the way, the guy did tell me that he had power washed this, so that's probably not normal curatorial best practices. Another way of looking at this is what is the landscape that they came into, that they built, created? We mostly live in built landscapes today, but we think of going from an archaeological site a few miles to find another archaeological site. Here in East Texas, if you put a shovel test into the ground, you get a couple of flakes, you have an archaeological site. But you don't think of large scale modification. So here is Belize, where the Caribbean Sea is over here. We're working in this area. This is what's known as the dumbbell bahos. It has been for 30 years. This giant bajo is called this giant bajo is the Alacranis bajo, which means the scorpion bajo. You can only guess. This is the Bajo Santa Fe, and down at the end you have Cahal. This is pretty flat until you get right here where you get the first of these series of uplifts that were uplifted at the same time as the Edwards Plateau. It's the same geological deposit, basically. And here is a 300-foot escarpment, kind of complicated. Here's another 300-foot escarpment. Imagine a plate just going up and breaking and breaking and breaking. And that's the geology that you're looking at. And that's us. So you go from very flat to pretty dramatic landscapes. We're mostly operating above this escarpment. You're going to see some things from just below. I'll take a second, and I'm going to have to mess with this. Sorry, but I want you to see this. But please remember this, mayamap.org. I'll be back with you in just a sec. So this is mayamap.org. This is the work, now that I messed it up for you. This is the work of our dear friend Lars Katoff at the University of Wyoming. It's hosted by the University of Wyoming. And that guy who said to me that he'd seen all the Maya sites didn't see all those. And this big empty space here, that's nothing more than a research gap. There's as many dots there, should be, as there are here. This is just kind of a area that hasn't been developed much yet. We are operating in here, and well, there, I can't quite do it. But if I go over and click, show only the sites with maps, the only sites with maps, come on. It's malfunctioning a little bit because it's supposed to show much fewer than that. Would be the sites that we are working on, which is this area. The site I'm going to talk most about today is actually not on this scale yet, but it's right about there. It is Xnoha, and then the other site we're talking about is Blue Creek. So mayamap.org, you can play with it, you can do whatever you want to with it.
Excuse me. I tested out that website just now, and I'm not sure if it was just me, but I actually wasn't able to see it at my home.
I'm sorry, Ophelia, I could not hear you.
Oh, I was just saying that I wasn't able to actually see the website when I tried at home. So I don't know if that was just my end or if anybody else was having that.
I had just pulled it up an hour ago, so it should be working. And I was actually on the website, so we'll charge Steve and Michelle to talk with Lars about that, and I'm sure they'll take corrective action. So Blue Creek is the site we worked at for the first 15 plus years. Work still continues. We want to go back and do a couple of other things. Each of these squares is a square kilometer. This is the downtown central precinct, the place with the pyramids. These are residential areas. These are non-residential areas. These are tops of hills, bottoms of hills. We're pretty sure this had upland dry farming as its use for these locations. And back when this map was made, we projected that there were ditch fields scattered around here because we kept seeing weird stuff. The wonderful thing about this map is that every dot is a ground truthed building of some sort or another. So the wonderful thing is, because this was mostly in fields and pasture, we could walk the whole thing. And it took a couple of years to build this map. It took a fellow named Bob Baker, a Texas archaeologist, a couple of weeks to shoot all this in with the total data station. But then it took a couple of more summers to build this part of it. So it was a lot of work. But what it does in a block map like this, it gives you a spatial model. It lets you see the context in which whatever you're thinking about or talking about exists in. If you find a building or an artifact here or here or here or here, it may tell you totally different things, okay? That's one kind of model. This is the LiDAR view of downtown Blue Creek. The bottom of it is about 50 feet above sea level. The top of it is about 350 feet above sea level. This is the downtown sector of Blue Creek. Just to get some stuff out of the way, this is all pasture, this is all treed. This line is the edge of the pasture where they bulldoze piles of stuff. So that's modern. This is modern, okay? Basically everything else you see here is not modern. And the most amazing thing happened 18 months ago. The Mennonite community were going to sell this off in parcels and destroy it. They met and they voted unanimously instead to support our idea of turning it into the first community archaeological reserve in Central America. So here's Plaza A. There's structure 1, it's 50 feet tall. We cleverly named them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is a ball court on a big platform. Here's a causeway to another pyramid. Here's a causeway up to Plaza B. This is the palace structure, a causeway to a pyramid. Jump over and some big residential materials are here. A causeway, weirdly enough, to this small group. Here's a big courtyard overlooking the ditched agricultural fields that are out here. This is called a rehoyada. And so is this and this and this. It's a sinkhole that is dry at the bottom. And this whole thing was built in a way that it drains out. Some materials go from draining materials, rain, water, and things like that, go from here into the sinkhole. Out here, you have more big courtyards. The tops of these hills have been bulldozed many times out here, so you don't see much anymore. But you get the idea. This is a pretty substantial downtown center. Here's another big plaza. Here's a artificial construction. We have sworn we're going to go back and try to figure that thing out. We don't understand it. We don't. Simple as that. So this is a LiDAR model, surface model of the site. And we've learned so much at first glance. A couple of things we learned at first glance was we didn't know this was here. I spent, I don't know, hundreds of days there, and I didn't know that was there. I also didn't know coming off the back of this was another, goes down a 60 or 70 foot ravine and back up, and there's a connecting walkway between those two. So we start realizing that the degree to which they modified the world around them was more getting into the range of what we do rather than to say what the Caddo of East Texas did. Here's another model. It's a temporal model. This temporal model shows us that population started low, rose up, dropped down. That in the early classic, monumental construction of big buildings peaked out, and not much in the late classic. If we'd stopped then, 5-7 years into the project, we wouldn't have known that that's when all the elite residential construction went on. We would have thought this was a shrinking, dying city. It was a thriving city. And we have little dots down here of places, specific events that we've been able to document. As you can see, this is from one of our students' master's thesis from the University of Leicester in England. She's actually from Atlanta. So our model of Blue Creek is one that says we have a big downtown center and we have residential neighborhoods, and we can compare those neighborhoods we have, and we can look at how they are different from each other and yet how they work together. And this is not unlike how you describe any city in the United States. You could describe Fort Worth that way. You could talk about the museum district. You could talk about the downtown. You talk about the residential areas, who lives where. Those are structural components of a city. A Maya city had similarly defined structural components. We got that. So if this sort of thing works, if this model holds, we should take it, we can export it. We'll export it to the site, the city, that's 10, 12 miles away. Let's go to Xnoha. I was shown Xnoha back in 1990. We wandered around the forest for most of a day before we found it. I long since had given up on the guy showing it to me. I ended up scribbling a map on the back of the only envelope I had in my backpack, and that's the one we published with 2 buildings or something. It was found again, same guy showed it to somebody else, unfortunately for his desire to name a new site, it was the same one, so this name stuck. This is the downtown plaza of Xnoha. It has one big giant plaza with a 70 meter long range building facing out here. There was also a Stella back here, and there's a Stella right there. Big buildings over here. This is actually the biggest one at the site. You take a little walk and you hit this platform. This is not a ball court, and I won't go into it unless you want me to. You climb up the staircase and you get onto this giant platform and Acropolis. There's another building that's about 30 feet tall, and we have been digging for the past several years out in here. We're about 10 feet down, and we keep finding sequences of building upon building upon building. We have no idea how much more we're going to find. Well, this map was done by Mark Wolf back in about 2001, 2 or 3, something like that. This was also done. There's Mark's downtown map, and this is Jason Gonzalez's doctoral work. At that time, Xnoha was in the forest, and you had to slice a meter wide cut through the forest in all these directions, and then you'd find every 100 meters you would do another cross one, and you did walk around here and walk around here and walk around here forever until you thought you had everything, thought you had everything, thought you had everything. This took 3 summers to construct this map. This was hard work. And just think about the difference from what we accomplished quickly at Blue Creek, relatively, and this, which took the same amount of time because it was forested. But you walk around, you see dots, buildings, but you don't understand the context because you don't have a block survey. This is not Jason's fault. It was just a ginormous job. Then again, you can fly over it for about 11 seconds with an airplane and do a better job with LiDAR today, which makes all of those heroic things that people like Mark Wolf have done in the past seem so, 20th century. So this, in 2016, we flew a 250 square mile LiDAR survey. I'll show you the limits of it later. This is the 40 square kilometer Xnoha block. Actually, it's a part of it. And it looks like a bunch of giants were playing horseshoes and throwing them out into the landscape, right? This area has been quite recently cleared. All of these horseshoe and funny looking things in the lowlands are recently constructed stock tanks. The roads are all dumped gravel roads. No one lives out here. This was a big block of land that the Mennonite community bought for farming. And the ones that got farmland at the bottom were happy. The ones that got up here weren't. So the things up here are generally not cleared yet. There are a number of things. Here's Xnoha. Here's the downtown center. There's the big plaza again, the dot, and there's the Acropolis. All around this elevated area, everything that looks like a dot is a Maya building. It was packed with buildings. But the mouth dropper. We were there in July of 2016 when this was done. We kind of begged NCOM, the people that attended to the survey, to give us something we could ground truth while it was still there rather than wait a year. They gave us this. We put it on the screen in the evening, and we were kind of overwhelmed because what you're seeing here, all over here, here are something that's never been seen before. These are space dividing walls around households. And what this tells us immediately is every square inch was occupied. You didn't go from Xnoha up to here and walk through the forest. You went across this little low-lying area and you had this big pile of houses. So we kind of cleverly decided we would call this the northern neighborhood. This is the western neighborhood. Over on the side is the eastern neighborhood, and down south is the southern neighborhood. So we cleverly titled that article "The News from Xnoha." And I'll get back to these in a second when I tell you what we did. Also, by the way, this is another set of ditched fields here in the lowlands. This is the very edge of the Alacronis Bajo, which I think I said, but if I didn't, covers 500 square kilometers, so it's huge. And Xnoha basically owned, if you will, everything right up to the edge of it. Here's an image from the northern group. This is another LiDAR image. And every one of these things that you are suspecting might be a building, you're simply correct. We've gone out and ground truth these for over the past several years. We haven't got to every single one. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 there. But at every one we've gotten to, we've confirmed that every one of those was a Maya building. Here's a good size Maya building. It's a patio group. And we have these lines everywhere. This is, by the way, modern bulldozing. This is a modern stock tank. The tree line is right about there. They just haven't bothered going up into the uplands. So the scale of the modification of the environment is staggering. Here's our collaborator, Josh Quokka's work on this. So here's the northern neighborhood. Here's the western neighborhood. Here's the downtown center of Xnoha again. It's just colorized a little differently. And what he tried to do, but it's obvious he couldn't be completely successful, he tried to overdraw every single one of these that we could confirm. And they kind of go everywhere. And as you can see, he was not able to get everything. So the next thing I show you, I think, are some numbers. Yeah, here's some numbers. In the northern group only, we have documented 85 linear kilometers of linear stone defining markers, a term I'm not using anymore. We have counted 2,167 buildings. It covers 40 square, that's in the 40 square kilometers. We are looking at 54.5 structures per square kilometers. If you use the numbers that Mayanists use for population, that's a whole different lecture, but at least we get a consistent comparative number. You would multiply that times 5.6, and you come up with 305 persons per square kilometer. This is suburban metroplex numbers. And it's about the same as the densest packed urban zones we see at the site of Cahal and Cahal. So little kingdoms have big populations. Okay. This kingdom, based out of this place, known as a Kawik, the central place, they built big buildings. They were grand, they were fabulous. Not as grand as the big ones, but now that we can document this intensive concentration of buildings in a place that everyone thought would have been called rural in the past, we are looking at the simple fact that back in the good old days around 1990, when we were talking about 10 million Maya people, we'd lost our minds. We're talking, I don't know. My best guess number that I talk about when I give these talks in the past is 25 million. There's no way that's accurate anymore. So we wanted to learn more about what's happening in these neighborhoods. And I'll back off. I don't have any slides about this, but I want to tell you that in small villages in Yucatan today, they have walled compounds. The walls are called albaradas, Spanish for wall. The open space is called a solare. And by the way, when I talk about these things, I need to cite my dear friend, Grace Boscape. She recently delivered a chapter for a book we're working on. She's been working in the village of Yaxina for 29, 30 years. And we visited there, we work with people there. And we're looking at how people today in Yaxina use their open exterior space within the bounding walls and trying to compare them to create models of how we can interpret the archaeological sites we're seeing here, the archaeological solares. So up here at AL 1701, AL 1702, and AL 1703, I can't even try to explain why Josh picked those numbers, but that's okay. We did some more intensive work. This is an albarada, a wall. It's actually a doctoral candidate in the Department of Geography and dear friend Sarah Eschleman standing on one, and it doesn't look like much. Once we'd seen this in the air, we had to go out and find them, and they weren't what we expected. Where we've seen them in modern times, they're stacked cut stones. These are dumped linear piles of rock. After you clean it up and excavate it, you have a meter-high hump that is maybe 3 meters across. But I point out that it's 90 kilometers long. So it's just huge. We're thinking that these actually didn't act as walls themselves, so that's another bad term. We're thinking, and there are plants that are used for this today, that specific trees grow very well in this stuff, and they simply put trees on these linear piles, and the trees were actually the visual barrier. Anyway, we're working on it. So we went to, this one is 17-2. Here is the enclosed space. These are all test pits, and we were simply counting artifacts. And as you can see, we had some high density areas right next to the buildings. These are the buildings we could see in the LiDAR, and Josh has redrawn them based on the field survey, again there. And look, you have a really high level of garbage next to buildings, and yet another high level over here. Well, it's abundantly clear that this is because people are patterning their behavior, right? That's what archaeologists study. We still throw away stuff in the same place. We still use things the same place for the same reason. Next thing we did, poor Josh, he calls this his training wheel here. We did phosphate tests across these things. And all of these dots are now where soil samples were taken, and we just did real simple phosphate tests. We didn't do the high-end stuff. We were looking at this with the idea of being able to get enough data to go to NSF and ask for the expensive stuff, which is what we are doing in another month. So here are the buildings. All of these buildings we test pitted. All of these buildings date to the early classic, 300 to 600 AD. We can't get it tighter than that at this time. So they're old. They're surrounded by these linear stone bounding features. And they have they're showing clearly human patterns of behavior. This is a classic human pattern of behavior. No one could mistake this. Here's another one. This is another phosphate survey. And as you can see, they did lots. And some places there's just not much. And some places the numbers get pretty high, okay? The other thing he found is that out in these areas are little depressions. Some of the depressions show up to us sometimes as being something goes up and we think it's a building. It's going down, it's a depression. They seem to be dug, intentionally created. Well, it doesn't matter what the word would be used there, but water catchment areas. So everything on this whole 30 square kilometers has been manipulated. So that's Xnoha, and that's this area, okay? The other thing we have found, and this makes us compare to the Blue Creek data. By the way, this is the edge of the Alacronis Bajo. I'm going to point out this is Gray Fox, and I'm going to touch on that later. This is Talish Mool, I'm going to touch on that in a minute. Is that this seems to be the central place for an area about this size, about 50 square kilometers, making it slightly less than half the size of Blue Creek. One day when we pulled up at the beginning of the season, we found that this whole area had been bulldozed, and Gail Hammond from University College London spent the next 3 years mapping buildings. This is what she mapped in those 3 years, and has a huge doctoral dissertation on it. So all these dots are buildings. So if you wonder if this density of settlement is this high, yes. You see the dots here. There are the dots there, it's huge. No, we haven't really struggled very hard to come up with good population numbers in a lot of this. I think we're going to Talish Mool. Oh, this is just a little, this popped up this morning when I was working on this. Here we are, this is us. This is from an article that was published a little while ago. It just kind of looks good and gives you better perspective. This is Talish Mool. Talish Mool is a small set of monumental architecture buildings that is on a satellite of Xnoha. It's exactly on the edge of the Alacronis Bajo. If you go to this little point right here and look across, you look 10 miles over to that next hill, it is big, broad, and flat. This is one of our students, Ian, and one of our guys, Pete, working on residential buildings that are around this thing. That was pretty colorful and interesting. They're located right around here. But this is what we're going to focus on. This is a small shrine, 20 feet high, that had rooms in it. And something we've never been able to find is an intact room until then. It's this building right here. There's another one right here. There's another one right here. Well, you'll see in a second. This is the lady who wanted to see this tonight, who's in England. We went through this outer room into this inner room and completely cleared it and found on this plastered wall a polychrome mural. Now, you should have already heard about that from National Geographic and all the worldwide coverage, but they plastered over it with white and we couldn't get to it. We know it's polychrome because there are places where things have spalled out where we can see bits of that mural. And to illiterate people like me, bits didn't tell me much. By the way, this is also our friend Alex Pastrana. He was pretty funny that summer because he also broke his leg and continued crawling up and down pyramids because he's just totally unstoppable. This is one of those bits. There are two legs coming out here. And our friend and collaborator, Christoph Helmke at the University of Copenhagen, he's like 40 years old and has a resume that's 10 times bigger than mine. I hate him in a loving way. Has looked at this, and what he thinks we're seeing is the legs of Pallequins bearing a ruler as they went by. This is not the stuff you'd put in here normally. This is something that's documenting a real moment, a real event. This is historical writing, well, historical painting. And if Christoph's correct about this, and I'd like to think he is, then suddenly you have a new set of thoughts. You've got to consider just what were they thinking when they saw this wealth walk by. Probably somebody as powerful as the ruler of the Khan dynasty, right? It's like, I don't know, it's like somebody even cooler than the president of the United States shows up and you want to record it forever. Well, and I apologize in advance. Since, you know, of course, the Khan dynasty, the great snake kings coming by, you might feel a little intimidated. You might feel like this. Sorry, I've waited 30 years for this moment. It just had to be done. So now that's what the cities look like. We're also working on the lowlands, on the wetlands. This is our friend Tim Beach and also Cheryl Beach. This is an ancient Maya canal, the one of the few that has not filled in. These are ancient Maya canals. This is a road. And this is our friend David Dick, who owns this property's modern solution to this being too wet. He backhoe trenched this. But once he did, these start popping up. And suddenly we realized that these canals have infilled over the years. This is the dry season, so the pasture's getting pretty yellow, except where it's a little wetter. So they just jump out at you once you start seeing them. So for almost 20 years, we've been working with Tim and Cheryl and their collaborators on understanding this. I'm going to give you a bit of it. This was something that back whenever the SAAs were in Memphis, 10 years ago, was the game changer. This is a uh, uh, false infrared multispectral image of a set of canals. Here's the same road. The trees are on the escarpment. This is at the base of the escarpment. This covers about 2,000 square meters. I think I did the wrong math on that. And this is a road that a dumped caliche road that the owner put in because he kept getting stuck every time he crossed a canal, though he didn't understand that. And the degree of engineering quality here just leaps at you. You have waters at the base of the escarpment, very wet. You have linear canals draining this area into a reservoir, draining into another exit, off away ultimately to the river. And just this area that we've been able to see because the trees were gone has 6 linear kilometers of canals. Of course, draining these wetland fields that now can be used for everything. So this was the footprint of our LiDAR mission in 2016. We've been walking around up here for a while tonight. Here's Blue Creek. This entire part of this escarpment and out to here was surveyed. And, you know, sometimes we just offer a guy a beer, it works. So I offered Juan a beer and he said, sure, we'll just record this as we fly home for nothing. Of course, they didn't get what we wanted. Oh, well. So we're going to go over in here for a while and then back here. But first, these are ditch fields that Sam Krause and I identified first from airplanes. We spent a bunch of the University of Texas at Tyler's money to use this airplane. We flew up and down the river about 1,000 times. Sam kept getting airsick, so I made her go alone. I didn't want her to throw up on me. These are ditched agricultural fields. These are ditched agricultural fields. These are ditched agricultural fields. These are, all of these are at the base of the bluff on the Mexican side. All of these are, oops, let's hold back on that. And what we realized is that we thought we'd had this unique situation at Blue Creek with ditched agricultural fields, and we were wrong. That is really much more common. And the degree to which the river drainage was under agriculture would have been looking a lot like the lower Mississippi Valley. And today it's grown over, but they're good traces, not hard to find, where these fields sometimes are normally wet. When they become unusually dry, you see them. When they're normally dry and they get wet, you see them. So they weren't hard to pick out. This is all pre-LiDAR. So this is what we took actually 3 years after the LiDAR mission, 2 years, I suppose. And we just published this as a Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences journal article, or well, now almost a year ago. This is what's called the Birds of Paradise Fields. This is a very ugly pixelated GOI image. This line, when you see it in the next image, is in the same place. It's always in the same place, different stuff, but you'll in a different place. And what you're seeing here is all the dark green are trees. And all of this is light green. You kind of see it, these lines here. Those are where we cleared heliconia from ditch fields. The reason it's light green is this is the sole vegetation in the whole thing. This big, beautiful birds of paradise plant, big, broad leaves, covering this wetland areas, and they just took it over and nothing else has grown in it. And you go a couple of feet away and they're gone and you're in the forest. It's a remarkable thing. I think whenever we have in the past cut these lines, we probably cut several $100,000 of heliconia down. Maybe we should try to sell it. I don't know. red line's in the same place. Here's the LiDAR image from 2016 of exactly that location. Now what you see is that where you could see ditch fields with the naked eye, including the one I was crossing, you can't see anything. You go into the trees and you get ditches everywhere. What we discovered, and the National Center for Laser Mapping is annoyed with us, but that's okay, is that when we have these dense, low-lying coverages like these big, wide leaves of heliconia, you can't get anything through it, and you cannot map the surface, even if you know what's there. But when you have trees, you can get enough to go through to find out what's there. Now, what's there, because this image for the longest time was the only thing we had, what's there is pretty remarkable. Here's the birds of paradise fields. The heliconia is blocking it. It goes a couple of miles. It goes until we run out of LiDAR. This set of ditched agricultural fields covers about 20 square miles, minimally. Maximally, when we do our spring 2020 mission, a whole group of us are getting together and we're all putting pieces into the proposal. And I think we've all got a little money, so we're all going to get what we want. If you just look at the topography, we could easily hit 100 square miles of contiguous ditched agricultural fields. And as you see, there's not a building out there. This is a giant area. If you were in Tyler, I can tell you it's half of the footprint of the city of Tyler, in which was nothing but agricultural land that had to be managed by God knows how many people, okay, who had to come out there every day. And we've even found, you don't see it here, but it does come up to right here, a causeway leading from another city, Grand Cahal, straight into these fields, allowing people getting access to the fields. It's the biggest causeway we know to be in Belize. This is not an ancient boat dock, that's just where they dock their boat. This is the stream that is used to get up into this area, and then you walk into this. This is from a little way south at the bottom of these, further back down the escarpment. And this is the site of Wari Camp. All the little white things are buildings. We found that back in 1990. And all of these are ditched agricultural fields at the base of it. We're looking at, what is that? Something like a kilometer across there. Right now, Colin Doyle in geography at UT Austin is doing his doctoral dissertation on dating these. Here's some summary. The Cahal fields, the one I showed you first, were built around the beginning of the Classic period. By the way, this should be like 300 dates now. This, my bad on the old graphic, but it makes the point. And the birds of paradise fields were built later, around the end of the Classic period. And then these dates are all the dates where the earliest dates we have from when they filled in. It's hard to date the hole in the ground, but you can date when the hole was filled. That tells us a bunch. Here are some of the things we know have been grown there. Mostly this is from Steve Bozarth and a few other people's work. Cacao, avocado, corn, sweet potato, manioc, and that whole list. Okay. Well, I haven't asked you guys a question yet, but do you want it to be the end? Or I can give you a little bit more if you're willing to be patient. I'll shortcut it because I've already gone a little longer than I wanted. So our bioarchaeologists, here they are, Hannah, Katie, and Carolyn, the triumvirate that runs all of our lives, are working on health and migration studies. They are looking at strontium isotopes and others in the human remains. We've now excavated 250 human remains that are in our collections at our research station. But that's not the story I want to talk about. This is the tiny little island of Moho Key, about a half-mile off the shore of Belize City. This is St. John's College, a Catholic school that has been there for, I think, 1850. And it's right on the shore. And like all Catholic schools, you got to have the one priest who goes out and collects crazy stuff. Well, he had passed away a couple of years, and there was a new president of St. John's College, and they encountered this room they wanted to use. They opened it up, and there's his stuff, and it hadn't been opened for 12 years. This is what was in it: 80 dead people. Here's the condition it was when they first found it. This is Katie and Hannah. Just piles of stuff, completely unrecorded. There was a cot. He used to sleep with them. And we have taken that whole collection from St. John's and brought to our research stations, curated there. A bunch of things are happening with it there. But the interesting thing is, go back to Moho Key. Moho Key has an interesting history. This isn't the first pandemic. In previous pandemics, like the Spanish flu pandemic, if you sailed into Belize City and you were sick, they'd put you on Moho Key. And if you lived, they'd let you come ashore. If you died, goodbye. It was a penal colony. It was a leper colony, literally. And it was a place where sick people got ditched because in the tropical low wetlands of coastal Belize, it's the perfect environment for spreading diseases. So that's what happened to them. And that's who these people probably are, except possibly the young Maya lady that has cause of death was fairly self-evident, the knife wound into the back of the head. That wasn't too hard to work out. So some of that's been published. But here's my do what moment. If you're from Texas, you don't have to have that explained to you. So I grew up in a little town in Illinois. When I went to visit the collection a couple of weeks after Katie was there, I just flipped this book open, and it is the passengers on flight 711 on Taka Airlines. It doesn't say the year, but it was about 1955. And I'm going down this list. Oh my God, they're from Illinois. I'm like, Jim Cicerelli is my father's friend. Lauren Willard was a minister at a little Lutheran church a couple miles from where I grew up. These were a bunch of Lutherans coming out of the Midwest flying to Belize, and people I knew when I was a child. So there was my do what moment. This is Grace Boscape, our dear friend who's down the block from you guys, normally, at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. Will McClatchy, formerly Vice President of Research. Will gave up his academic career a couple of years ago because what he always really wanted to do is grow apples in Oregon, and he now is running an apple orchard. He's also an expert on apple DNA, so go figure. Sam Krause, who's now an assistant professor at Texas State. We had some money, and we got them all out there, and they collected plants. This report's about to be ready to be compiled. And in 2 weeks, they identified about 400 species of previously unidentified edible plants. This is in the gray fox area, which I'll tell you about in just a sec. We went back, this is Blue Creek up here, there's the Rehollado. A few years ago, we dug this giant trench into the bottom of the Rehollado. All of the doctors, Louisa and Samantha, newly minted, our good friend from Australia, Duncan. And we found a lot of mercury. Mercury comes from cinnabar. It gets used on paints on walls. And what we realize that we have on our hands is an invisible commodity that nobody ever really thought about. And invisible commodities we're familiar with. If you know something about the recent work at Chaco Canyon, they've identified black Yopon holly tea residues. They've identified cacao from southern Mexico and Belize, and cups. And black Yopon holly, by the way, comes from the forest of the Big Thicket south of Tyler. So, whatever, hundreds of miles away at Chaco Canyon, they were running a Starbucks with the only caffeinated plant in North America and with chocolate. I'm going to skip this. One last small thing. I want to mention gray fox because this is another aspect of what we do. Gray fox is up here by the edge of the border. The stuff we're talking about before is down here. It really goes to the border. It was about to be destroyed. So we bought it. And we are in negotiations with the community to give it back to them to double the size of the first Mennonite archaeological reserve in the world. Somebody asked me why, and I said, that's why. This is our property boundary. We missed in the original survey, so we bought this triangle. Our property goes over here, somewhere in there. I'm betting that if I went there today, there'd be no trees over there. The only piece of standing trees in northwestern Belize will be the 125 acres we bought. And we've been working with the community, and they are thrilled to take it over as a reserve and a park. Even though they're also thrilled to knock down, the same people, we're all thrilled to knock down all these trees. Thank you. It's always my pleasure.